is a Mojave ground squirrel, very happy one. You'll notice that there's a lot of grain scattered around, and you can see that this picture has got date stamp, and it was taken with a Reconyx camera, automatic trail camera, and this is how we attract the squirrels to find out where they're living. Just set up an automatic camera, put out the grain, and amazingly they show up. So look at this guy. This is a chubby female doing very well. You notice the brown on the pelage on the back and light colored underneath. There's kind of a white eye ring, and the tail is quite short for a ground squirrel. So those are some of the features that you look for if you're trying to decide what kind of ground squirrel you're dealing with. So once again, a trail camera photo, and this shows Mojave ground squirrel on the left, showing the light-colored under section of the tail, and that's another thing you look for if you see a squirrel running across the road. The guy on the right is a white-tailed antelope squirrel, which is very common in the Mojave Desert. And people down there find out that I'm studying Mojave ground squirrels. They say, oh, we see those little chipmunks running across the road all the time. So when the two of them, the two members of the two species come together in front of one of our cameras, the Mojave ground squirrel always wins. They will interact in an aggressive manner with interlopers like the white-tailed antelope squirrel and send them flying. So even though Mojave ground squirrels look very docile, they are quite aggressive toward other species that try to get at the food. And just to show you how nice they can be with humans, here I am with a Mojave ground squirrel that I've captured, weighed, and checked reproductive condition, etc., and just let it out, and it's happily sitting on my lap. It's actually probably scared to death and expecting to be grabbed and ripped apart by this predator any moment. But the area where they live, Western Mojave Desert, and the dark line here, hope I can make this cursor move properly. The dark line represents what's considered to be the limits of the geographic range of the species. And I'll just point out several landmarks. One thing that you see here, there's a large naval base in the middle of the Mojave Desert where the Navy tests their aerial weapons, and they have another section here, Fort Irwin, which is the Army's training ground for armored warfare over here, and then the Air Force is involved as well down here at Edwards Air Force Base. So the Mojave ground squirrel is happy to live on a number of these military bases. They do not play favorites among the services. And some other things. Up here on China Lake, the Coso Range. This is a desert mountain range where my wife Barbara and I have been studying Mojave ground squirrels for many years. It was kind of how we got started back in the 80s. So here is one of the major towns, Ridgecrest. Here's Barstow. Many of you may have had the pleasure of going through Barstow on the way to Vegas. That's what most people do. They don't stop. town of Mojave here, down here, Lancaster, Palmdale, and Victorville. And there's a state park up here, Red Rock Canyon, the Desert Tortoise Natural Area, another protected area. And so if you think about this, you see that the military actually controls a lot of the Mojave ground squirrel habitat. But before we go on to that, just show you what some of the habitat looks like. This is what you might see in a rainy year in February with snow on the mountains, and the flat land down below is where the ground squirrels like to live. So desert is not always dry and brown. Occasionally they actually get some rain. This slide, again, it shows the range of the ground squirrel, emphasizes the military bases, and one of the problems with conservation of the species is that land ownership within its range is pretty much divided, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. BLM, Bureau of Land Management, owns approximately 1/3 of the range and manages it. Private land, about 1/3, down to the south near Lancaster and Victorville, and then military land about another 1/3. And the Mojave ground squirrel is not federally listed, so the military technically does not have to take account of conservation of the species, but I should mention that they do include the species in their natural resource management plans, and they do their very best to keep track of how it's doing on their bases and to consider it in management activities. So, first time that Mojave ground squirrels were discovered by European humans, 1886 in Lucerne Valley, which is way off to the lower right if you recall the map. It was described as a species of Spermophilus by E. Hart Merriam at the U.S. National Museum, one of the 19th century famous biologists. But until 1971, very little attention was paid to it. Occasionally somebody would go out and trap one and make it into a museum specimen. But beyond that, nobody really paid much attention to it. Then in 1971, California Endangered Species Act was passed. And the first thing that folks in the Department of Fish and Game had to do was to figure out, okay, what animals and plants are we going to list? And they got together a committee of professors from Southern California universities and said, so, you know, what rare animals do you have? And the professors kind of scratched their heads and they said, well, you know, we used to take students out in the desert trapping ground squirrels, and we haven't seen many Mojave ground squirrels for a number of years. And there was, the only non-academic on the committee was somebody from the state agriculture department who said, well, you know, ground squirrels could be agricultural pests. So he voted no, but the majority voted to list the Mojave ground squirrel, the MGS, as rare. Then, with reauthorization of the Endangered Species Act in California, it was automatically changed to a threatened status, and it stayed there for a number of years. And then in the early 90s, the Fish and Game Commission voted to delist it at the behest of a petition from the Board of Supervisors in Kern County. And in spite of testimony by biologists of the Department of Fish and Game, the Commission decided that the species should be delisted. It was not really threatened. The various environmental groups, of course, were up in arms about this, took the decision to court. It went through clear up to the California Supreme Court, and the court overturned the delisting on the basis of a technical problem, which was that there should have been a CEQA analysis. And since the local politician from Kern County by that time had achieved his goal of a seat in the California Assembly, people just kind of lost interest. And so the species has remained listed as threatened. So strange events. So 2006, the Bureau of Land Management decided, as part of their West Mojave plan, that they would come up with conservation measures for the squirrel. The record of decision on the West Mojave plan was 2006. And this was just before the great rush for renewable energy development in the Mojave. And so the West Mojave plan took no account of the potential for renewable energy development. So it was rather ineffective in response to this big push for renewable energy. The West Mojave plan only applied to BLM land, and so only a third of the range of the squirrel was protected under this conservation plan. Defenders of Wildlife then petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that Mojave ground squirrel should be federally listed, and that was in 2005. So the 12-month finding was delivered in 2011, and the conclusion, as you can see there, was that the species was not worthy of federal listing, not endangered or threatened in a significant portion of its range, as they put it. So that interesting decision, and the impression that you have from reading their opinion is that it was not a good idea to have another federally listed species in the desert in view of the interest in renewable energy development. But that's just my my personal opinion. So this animal was first described as Spermophilus mohavensis. You may have noticed on the first slide that it's now Xerospermophilus mohavensis. Some taxonomists decided in 2009 that the genus Spermophilus needed to be split up into something like 6 or 8 other genera. So we now have Xerospermophilus, xero meaning dry, so it inhabits dry areas. It has a closely related relative, the brown-tailed ground squirrel, Xerospermophilus terita. There are 2 other species in the genus that live in Mexico and the southern Great Plains. So we've just learned recently that the round-tailed ground squirrel and Mojave ground squirrel are closely enough related so that they are capable of hybridizing. And there's some evidence that west of Barstow, near the Mojave River and on Fort Irwin, that hybridization is actually occurring, and this is something that needs to be looked into a little further. So, round-tailed ground squirrel. So, guy on the left with the short tail and the brown pelage is our Mojave ground squirrel, and on the right, again enjoying the grain in front of the camera, is a round-tailed ground squirrel, and their pelage is kind of reddish cinnamon rather than brown, and they have long tails that with hairs kind of coming out 360 degrees all the way around. And so, you know, you would think that wouldn't be that hard to tell them apart. Here's a round-tailed ground squirrel rapidly disappearing, and you see the long tail that is not particularly light colored on the underneath. And many times I and others have wondered about the specific identity of a ground squirrel as we're rushing across the road. But that's what you're supposed to be looking for, is the tail structure primarily. Okay, so round-tailed ground squirrels are very widely distributed in the southwestern deserts. So this is round-tailed ground squirrel range down into Mexico. Whoops. Let's see if I can go back here. There we go. And down into Baja. And the two species meet along here from Fort Irwin down toward Barstow. So if you think about the geographic location, the Mojave ground squirrel is really adapted to the winter rainfall desert in the western Mojave, just east of the Sierra Nevada, where most of the rainfall comes down in the winter, whereas its friend over here is really adapted to the summer rainfall deserts of Arizona to get the monsoonal vegetation. And so we don't really know very much about the details of the evolutionary history of these two species, but they've probably been distinct for 1 million years, the geneticists guess. But there's some concern maybe that the genetic distinctness is starting to break down. Let's see. Okay, so Mojave ground squirrels, really, as I said, nobody paid much attention to them until they were listed. But way back in 1960, Hudson and Bartholomew at UCLA studied the physiology of Mojave ground squirrel, round-tailed ground squirrel, tried to figure out how they were adapted to living in very hot, arid environments. And George Bartholomew was my advisor when I did my doctoral work at UCLA. And so after the first semester, he said, well, you know, it's about time you picked out a research project. And I said, you know, I'd really like to study desert ground squirrels. And he said, well, you know, I have a student who's several years ahead of you, and he's done that. And that was Jack Hudson. So then I had to go off and study bats for years, which was fun. But anyway, I'm glad to get back to the ground squirrels. So I almost got started back in about 1960. So the next person who took any interest in this poor creature was Tony Recht, who was a graduate student in the 70s at UCLA. And he actually used radio telemetry back in the mid-70s. And he built his own transmitters at that time. I'm really impressed with that accomplishment in those days. And so he was the first one who really monitored what they ate, how they used space, the size of home ranges, and daily activity, and so on. Jeff Ardall, in 1980, was the first to actually carry out extensive range-wide surveys to try to figure out where they were, where they were most abundant, so on. And Jeff is still involved. He was with Bureau of Land Management for many years. He's now retired and working for Defenders of Wildlife, and he's busy evaluating the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan to see how well it's going to protect Mojave ground squirrels. So then late 1980s into the mid 1990s, COSO grazing exposure study, and my wife Barbara and I worked on this with many students helping out for many years. This was actually, it says it's a grazing exposure study. So there was, in the COSO range, at that time, there was a geothermal power plant that was permitted. And so they figured they were going to use up a few thousand acres of Mojave ground squirrel habitat. So how to mitigate for that? And in those days, the rule was that you tried to mitigate at the site where the impacts were occurring, instead of going out and buying land somewhere. So the idea was we'll get the rancher to pull his cattle off about 44,000 acres of Mojave ground squirrel habitat surrounding that geothermal plant and see if removing domestic livestock is going to benefit the ground squirrels. And so we said, well, this has got to be a long-term study. We need funding for many years to see what's going to happen here. And luckily enough, we were able to pull it off and picked out, we finally concluded that variation in winter rainfall was far more important in controlling and regulating Mojave ground squirrel populations, had much greater effect than grazing, as far as we could tell. Maybe if we had kept on going another 20 years, we would have seen the effects of grazing removal. So a lot of what we actually know about the biology of the squirrel was derived from that study way back, 20-some years ago. In 2001, we were able to get some pretty good funding through Department of Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game at the time. And since then, I've been working with the Endangered Species Recovery Program at Cal State Stanislaus. Pat Kelly, whom some of you may know, directs that program. It's a conservation biology research unit at that university, and so I've worked under their aegis for a number of years now. And let's see. So, what about the biology of the squirrel? They like soils that are good for burrowing, and so they would naturally tend to occur on alluvial pans, bajadas, basins, valleys, and they avoid establishing their ranges in steep rocky places. One of the things that we discovered in our studies at COSO is, by doing radiotelemetry there, that dispersing juveniles are perfectly happy to run up and down hills through rocky areas to try to find a nice flat spot with alluvial soil. So they're not necessarily restricted to only being in alluvial soils. So as far as vegetation communities, they can be found throughout the western Mojave in all of the major vegetation communities. So creosote bush scrub covers about 50% of their range. Saltbush scrub, especially around in depressions, around dry lakes. Mojave mixed woody scrub, which is a diverse community of shrubs, usually without creosote bush. Black brush scrub, which is up in higher elevations, not very widely distributed. So there's been a lot of puzzlement about preferred plant communities or vegetation communities, because somebody did an analysis of the occurrences, in the Natural Diversity Database and tried to plot them on the different plant communities. It turns out that about 50% of their range is covered by creosote bush, and about 50% of the records in the CNDDB are in creosote bush, and so on for the other communities. So it's what we really kind of picked up, though, is that areas that have a higher diversity of shrubs and native forms tend to be the areas where the squirrels are most abundant. And in particular, Mojave mixed woody scrub seems to be a favorite spot. Our study sites at COSO, for example, we were fortunate enough, we happened to pick study sites that were Mojave mixed woody scrub. So, some pictures of the habitat. This gray stuff here in the foreground is Mojave mixed woody scrub. Back further, I lose that cursor all the time. Back over here is creosote bush. And then over here in the upper right, this is creosote bush scrub near the Desert Tortoise Natural Area. And you notice the larger green things are creosote bush, the smaller whitish ones are bursage, and this is a very common community type throughout the range of the species. But something like this does not appear to be really great habitat in that neither of those shrubs are good to eat. You'll also notice that there's some green tinge around, and that's mostly an introduced annual grass, some fillery, erodium. So there's not much for them to eat in a situation like that. Then this is lower left, one of our study sites at COSO with Joshua trees. And when the Joshua tree fruits are ready to harvest, the squirrels are up there getting them. And again, Mojave mixed woody scrub. On the lower right, rich growth, a good year of the native forbs, which they also like to eat. So, annual cycle. I've mentioned to several people that this is an excellent study species because they're active in the spring and early summer when temperatures are moderate in the Mojave. When it gets really hot and dry toward July, they go underground and they're in dormancy for half the year until about February. So that means that I can be in the desert when it's really nice, and then I can go home to the East Bay where the climate is wonderful all the year, and leave the squirrels to sleep happily underground. So males come out early February, females about 2 weeks later, after the males have had a chance to feed and build up testosterone levels. The result is that there's a 4-week gestation. Young are usually born toward the end of March. They're weaned by early May, and then they often will disperse from their natal location. The adult males, having had nothing much to do for several months except get fat, will go into dormancy May, June. Adult females, June and July, and then the juveniles maybe July and August. So that's their annual cycle. So people sometimes ask, well, what's the litter size? How many young do they produce? So this photo was taken by my colleague Dave Delaney, and he's kind of a squirrel whisperer. He drives along dirt roads with the windows open, and he listens for the calls, the vocalizations of the young and the mother in the reproductive time, April and early May. when the young are out. And so he heard a call, stopped the car, got out and walked carefully over toward where the call was coming from. He got to within about a meter of these animals, and then he stood there for an hour watching them and taking photos. And so his favorite thing is when he shows this, he asks people, so how many young squirrels are there? And I'm not sure how good this picture is. If it were full screen, it might be better. But turns out there are 9. That's about the maximum litter size. The females have 10 teats. So, okay, one of the things that we discovered about squirrel reproduction is that it's really very closely related to winter rainfall, which in turn is very closely related to the growth of the spring wildflowers, the annual forbs in the West Mojave. And so this is a plot of winter rainfall at our COSO study sites, or at least at a weather station that's about 15 kilometers away. It's the best we could do. And you'll notice that the tall green bars represent the rainfall in years when the squirrels reproduced. The shorter yellow bars, rainfall when the squirrels did not reproduce. And so you look at these two, and the threshold seems to be about 80 millimeters, or approximately 3 inches of winter rain is required for reproduction. And so you notice here that over this period of time, almost half of the years, there was no reproduction. So when the rain falls below that threshold, it's not like, well, 10% reproduce or 40% reproduce, 0 reproduce. And evolutionarily, it makes good sense. I mean, why spend all that energy raising young when there's not enough food to eat, and they're probably going to starve, and then you're going to starve. So if you notice here, there was a period of 2 years where the rainfall did not allow reproduction. And so this could have some consequences. So there are 2 sites at COSO where so-called COSO Basin, Cactus Peak, 2 sites where we've monitored numbers of adults in the spring over many years, 1990 to 2014, with a little gap there when the funding ran out. But you notice that there's tremendous variation in the number of adults from year to year. And for example, numbers are pretty low here. This was a drought, almost 3 years. Then in this period, in the early 1990s, there was a prolonged El Nino episode. So there was heavy rain for a number of years. Numbers went way up. Then through most of the last decade, numbers were really low. There were some years with high rainfall, some years with low rainfall, but there was never a consistent period of multiple years with a lot of rainfall. And numbers are really low. Then you look over here, and numbers shoot way, way up, then down again. So there were something like, 69, I think, adults here in 2012. And it was down at the same site to 9 this year. And so this period where the numbers went up so greatly was a period of 3 consecutive years of good rainfall. And so people will ask, well, so how many Mojave ground squirrels are there out there? And the answer is there's really no way to know, even if you could sample the populations in a number of different areas, because 2 years from now, there might be 10 times as many or a tenth as many. So you really can't use that information for management purposes. And this was something that we picked up from this long-term study at COSO. So the data that you're looking at here, this is the only site where we have multi-year information on Mojave ground squirrel abundance. But at least you can see that if you know rainfall, you can pretty much predict whether there's going to be a lot of squirrels around or not. Okay, so one question, of course, is what's their diet? They feed almost entirely on plant material, although there was one year when there was a plague of caterpillars, and the squirrels went after the caterpillars. There are a lot of different species of herbaceous perennial plants that they use. They like foliage, flowers, seeds, and during the active season, particularly in April, that's when the wildflowers are at their maximum, and that's when the females are lactating. That's when they need the energy and the moisture, and they feed on the annual wildflowers, the forbs, at that time. And so the diet shifts during the active season, and most of what we know about their diet is from this COSO study and microhistological analysis. So we collected poop from 758 different squirrels, and microhistological analysis, that involves you break up the poop, and then you got to look at the fragments of plant materials under the microscope. So you've got to identify the different types of plants by little patches of epidermis that may have characteristic hairs and margins, particular patterns in the margins. So it's very painstaking work. And when we started this diet study, we were collecting all of these samples, and there was a lab at Colorado State called the Composition Lab that led to a lot of confusion among English students but the Composition Lab, they did this microhistological analysis on contract basis, and Barbara decided that she would do this. She would learn how to do this. So she bought a phase contrast microscope, and she went back to the Composition Lab to be trained for a week. And when she got home, after looking at these little plant fragments through the microscope, she said, we're going to contract this out. So that's what we did. And so surprisingly, what turned out was that they really liked shrub leaf. And they're chenopode shrubs that they like in particular. Winterfat, spiny hop sage, they eat some saltbush. The native forbs are important. It turned out that there were 8 plant species that made up most of the diet, but a total of 77 distinct food items. So here's winterfat, which the leaves taste pretty good. I can verify that. And they have leaves pretty much year-round. And it's a Great Basin shrub. It gets down into the northern Mojave, but ranchers in the Great Basin would feed their sheep and cattle on winterfat, put them into winterfat patches. So that's where it got its name. This is spiny hop sage. Again, tastes good to me. You don't necessarily use these as indicators that if you find them, you're going to find Mojave ground squirrels. Doesn't always work that way, but generally, if there's a high abundance of these shrubs, the chances are good that there will be good population of Mojave ground squirrels. So, as I mentioned, we were also able to do radiotelemetry to investigate home range, dispersal, use of space. Started doing this at COSO, and then I was able to do some more about 10 years ago at another site. Female home range, just 1 or 2 hectares, few acres. But the adult males in the breeding season cover a tremendous amount of ground. I've followed radio-collared male for part of the day, going a total of 1,500 meters, and he was visiting various female home ranges, checking to see the females are only receptive for 1 day. So the males have to be pretty active. Juvenile dispersal, late May, early June. It's male biased, as is true of most mammals. The males are the ones who generally take off and move longer distances. But we found that some young females can go 4 to 6 kilometers, which is pretty unusual. And you think about the adaptive value of some of the females moving away from where their mothers brought them up. Obviously, it must be good habitat where they were born because they survived and did okay. So why would they move? Well, it turns out if you get a couple of dry years, that a lot of areas that are less lush habitat, the local population will die out. And to recolonize those areas, it's obviously not enough just for the males to disperse to these areas where there's been local extirpation. Females have got to get out there too. So that's my theory anyway. This map again, and this area here, south of Inyo County, Freeman Junction. This is an area where I was fortunate enough about 10 years ago to be able to do radiotelemetry for a couple of years. And that's the general area, that photo that I showed with the mountains, the Sierra, east side of the Sierra and the snow on them. So that was that flat plain below the mountains there. And we radio-collared a number of adult males. And they were given names by the assistants that were helping me. And these are their home ranges in the breeding season. And you can see the section outlines here. So this is a square mile. So Willie, for example, covered almost a square kilometer, 250 acres in his searches. So this is what the home ranges of the males looked like in March. In April, testosterone levels are down, and their activity ranges are shrinking. And in May, they aren't moving much at all. And in June and July, the males are getting very fat, and they don't want to move more than a few meters from their burrow. They're getting ready to go into their dormancy. Okay, but if you put the female home ranges in, you can readily see that there's the male home ranges are overlapping where the females are. So there's something going on there. So I'm drawing close to the end here, right? Is that, oh no, that's an hour that you haven't changed the clock. Okay, all right, okay, I'm sorry, well, you folks are going to be exposed to more. So I was trying to wrap it up, figured. Harry here, we'll meet Harry more personally in a few moments, but Harry would visit Ali and Phyllis and Zelda, and then Dilbert, and undoubtedly there were other males that were visiting Ali as well. I've been criticized because of anthropomorphizing these animals with these cute names, but it was not my fault. My assistants insisted on doing this, and Harry, for example, his full name is Harry Houdini, because we put a collar on him, and then we couldn't find him, and he had slipped the collar somehow, gotten out of it, and we had to catch him again and put another collar on him. And Willie was Wandering Willie because he disappeared. We radio collared him over here. He disappeared for about a week. And then some of the guys were driving back home along this road. And they said, well, let's just put the antenna out the window. And there was Willie over there. And I would bet that there is a female in that area. So, okay, so that's kind of how they use the space during their active season. And the dispersal of the young, I've picked out this slide and the next one. This slide is from that Freeman Gulch area where Harry and Willie lived. So you can see the champion disperser was Gerald, who moved 8 kilometers, 5 miles. And we had a lot of fun tracing these animals. They would, the range of the collar was like maybe 400 meters. You had to be fairly close to pick it up. So, of course, Gerald disappeared in late May. And we, walked all over around close to where he had been born and couldn't find him. So in July, we called in a Fish and Game ranger who had an aircraft equipped with the receivers. And we flew about 50 kilometers that afternoon back and forth across that valley every 1,000 meters. And finally it was like, oh, okay, so it's, we've been up here a long time. It's really bumpy. Time to go in. And as we aimed for the airport up here in Inyo County, we got Gerald's signal. And we were able to follow Gerald the next year. He stayed in the same place. And finally, the third year, it was time to stop the study, so we captured him and took his collar off. The names of the young ones were started with the same letter as the mother's name. So Gaia was Gerald's mother, and Kathy was Costello's mother. Costello moved about 4 kilometers. We found him from the air right by a 4-lane highway over here. When we went down to find him on the ground, he ran across the highway, and we were following, with our antennas going across Highway 14. And he got across safely, and we barely did. And then the next day we went back, and he had taken his collar off on the west side of the highway and left it in the burrow, and we never saw him again, so we don't know where he went to. But here's Fanny, who moved a little over 1 kilometer, so a female, and then Swank, who moved about 4 kilometers. So this is an example of a female making a long-distance movement. unfortunately found her remains and her collar the next spring in a burrow up there, so she didn't make it. So this is another map, but this shows one of our study areas at COSO. And the juveniles, there's males and females, M and F. The juveniles were radio collared in the center here. The first dashed circle is 1 kilometer, and then out here 5 kilometers. And so we did have a female here. If I can find the pointer. Okay, we did have a female here that moved 4 kilometers, and we had a couple of males that moved 4 and 5 kilometers. So this is an entirely different area, but indicates that behavior is probably pretty consistent. So what that means is that if you're thinking about a conservation area, you better think about having some space for dispersal. They need a lot of room, these little animals. Okay, so how do you find out whether you have Mojave ground squirrels in an area, and how do you find out how many there are? Visual and auditory surveys, not too good. When the females have their litter with them, there's a lot of these chirps back and forth. So that was how my friend Dave found that group of 9 young. But the rest of the year, not too much noise from them. If you come up on one unexpectedly, they'll give a chirp as they go down the burrow. Visual surveys, not very effective. They hear you coming before you can see them. And so basically what we're down to is live trapping, which is the traditional approach, or use of trail cameras. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife has a protocol for trapping to determine presence or absence. And this is primarily for sites that are proposed to be developed for housing, energy, resources, whatever. And the trail cameras, I mentioned my friend Dave Delaney. He was the one who got me started doing this back in 2009. And as you've seen from the photos, as long as you put some data out, you can get photos. So which is the better approach? Well, it depends on what your objectives are. The protocol trapping for Department of Fish and Wildlife, you're supposed to trap a site 3 times during the season, early spring when the adults are all out and active, in May when juveniles are running around, and then in midsummer, June 15th, July 15th, when the juveniles have completed their natal dispersal, so you might pick up some that have moved into an area. The usual procedure is you set up a grid with 100 traps per 80 acres of area that's proposed for development, or if it's a linear project like a pipeline or a transmission line, it would be 100 trap grid per mile. Each site is supposed to be trapped for 5 days during the session, during each of those 3 sessions. And if there are no MGS detected, then the developer is good for a year. They can break ground within that year, and they are not required to compensate because the assumption is that species is not present, is not being impacted. So the protocol trapping obviously is going to be done in development areas, usually in the southern part of the range, often around Lancaster, Palmdale, Victorville, Mojave, where MGS are scarce. And over that period, 2003 to 2012, there were 443 sites trapped with protocol trapping, and less than 4% actually found an MGS there. And so you often hear people say, boy, those animals are really hard to catch. It turns out that the trapping, when you use it for a research survey in an area that's not slated for development, it has been more successful. So 40% of sites that were trapped with some kind of objective research in mind turned out over that period of time to have MGS. So, my conclusion, it helps to trap where there are MGS there if you want to catch them. Of course, developers, are not that enthusiastic about catching them. Now, sequence of photos showing how a Mojave ground squirrel can react to a trap. This is Harry, and this was spring of 2005. We had studied his movements and activities for 2 years, and it was time to take his collar off. But the battery was pretty low, and so we searched and searched and finally picked up a little beep and found the burrow that Harry was in. And Harry came out to see us, and we put some traps right at the entrance of the burrow. And here's Harry looking at the trap. And so he's seen these before. And you notice the short tail with the light color underneath, so it's definitely a Mojave ground squirrel. Now, Harry is on the other side of the trap from the photographer. Here's his back, and here's the treadle of the trap, and there's grain on it. And Harry knows about this, so here he's reaching through the mesh. You think, okay, the trap's open, there's bait in the back, obviously the squirrel's going to go in. But that's not necessarily the way they think. So here, Harry has reached in, got a piece of corn, and he's eating the corn, and just looking at us. And then he moved around to the front of the trap and continued munching on the corn. And eventually he went in the trap, and we took the collar off and turned him loose. So I hope he's done well. But trapping is effective, but sometimes the squirrels have their own approach. So camera trapping, I mentioned Dave Delaney, and we did 2 years of preliminary studies on Fort Irwin, finally figured out our method, and with funding from BLM, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and other sources, we were able to do an extensive survey using camera traps. And whether it was luck or not, we actually detected Mojave ground squirrels at 73 out of the 123 sites over those 2 years. So, not sure how well this shows up, but this is east of the town of Mojave, and this is a T-post with a camera attached to it. And here is the bait pile, and there's a white-tailed antelope squirrel enjoying the bait. So that's kind of how we set up the cameras. And then you want to be sure that you go out early in the morning to replace the bait every morning, because overnight the K-rats, kangaroo rats, will stuff their cheek pouches and remove all of the bait. So you got to get out there early in the morning before the squirrels wake up. You want to make sure it's all provisioned. And this is me. I'm not sure why I was looking so happy and delighted, but this was taken by Pat Kelly of Endangered Species Recovery Program. And maybe I was happy because I was almost finished, and I'd gotten up around 3:30, and the sun was up, and I think this was my last camera to service. But so here's the camera, the T-post, and here's the pile of bait. And what we like to do, just as presentation, find a stick and dip it in peanut butter and stick it up there. And the squirrels will come up and grab it like a lollipop and eat the peanut butter first. So we have to carry many pounds of bait with us and extra batteries and so on. So that's the fun of camera trapping. Our standard procedure is that we'll pick a site. In this case, we were doing it at random, but only on public land. And we'll put 10 cameras out in an array, 2 lines of 5, and they're 150-meter centers. So it's about a mile to walk around the whole array of 10 traps. And 150 meters is kind of the width of a home range, so the cameras are separated enough so we're not really going to pick up the same animal at multiple cameras. If they were closer together, then we wouldn't be sampling adequately. And so this is an aerial view of how the cameras are arranged. So advantages of cameras. It turns out that you can pick up MGS, detect them at least as effectively as you can with traps. And we've done 1 or 2 experiments where we've trapped marked animals so that they could be recognized in the photos, then set up cameras, and we've found that we were able to get pictures of all of the marked animals plus a couple of unmarked ones. So the other thing is, with the cameras, you don't need people who have all of these fancy permits from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. You can hire folks just out of college who don't have a lot of experience and just show them how to set up the cameras. And so it's nice in that way. And what's also very nice is that you're not endangering the animals. If you have an animal in a trap and it gets really hot, you can kill the animal if you don't get out there quick enough to check the traps. But here the animals come and go as they please. And one of the things we discovered is that the white-tailed antelope squirrels are there as soon as the sun is up, and the Mojave ground squirrels sleep in for a couple of hours. They don't. So you can document these daily activity patterns and behavioral interactions, like learning that Mojave ground squirrels are dominant over antelope squirrels. So there are a number of advantages, but with trapping, you've got to do trapping if you're going to get demographic data. And you can mark animals with the RFID tags, the PIT tags, like you do with a cat or dog. And so you can mark individual animals, permanent markers. You can use that to determine abundance. If you want to do radiotelemetry or you want to take samples for genetic studies, then obviously you've got to have the animal in hand. So it depends on what your objectives are. Now, I'm not sure, that's not too bad. So with all of this trapping and, with live traps, with camera traps, this attempts to represent some of the recent data as to where Mojave ground squirrels have been found. And we start in with the yellow dots. These yellow dots are from research trapping that's been done. For example, Edwards Air Force Base and around there. There's been a lot of sampling done, and it turns out there are a lot of squirrels there. Over in this area of Fort Irwin, some other locations, and up in the northern part of the range up here. So these are recent records. You'll notice also down here around Victorville, there are 5 dots there. So over the last 10 years or so, there have actually been 5 records of Mojave ground squirrel down there, but it seems to be an isolated relic population and all on private land, so it's pretty hard to figure out, what's the important habitat there. The red are the camera stations, 2011, 2012. where we actually got pictures of Mojave ground squirrels. So we worked all the way from up in Inyo County, clear down through here, and did some work down here. This is where the type locality is, way down in the southeast corner here. That's where they were first caught. First ones were trapped back in 1886. And so you notice that there are black dots here. Those are places where we didn't get records using the cameras. But then you'll also notice that there are green symbols of various sorts around here. Those are round-tailed ground squirrels. So it looks like Mojave ground squirrels don't occur where the type locality is, over in the Lucerne Valley. It also looks as though round-tailed ground squirrels are kind of moving in to MGS territory in Fort Irwin and particularly west of Barstow. So just mention one other thing. 2012, this is not completely up to date. 2012, there were a lot of trapping records of Mojave ground squirrels over here. So what it's kind of looking like at this point is that there are big areas where we really don't know what the status of the species is, like this part of China Lake, this part of Fort Irwin. There are other areas where there's been a lot of protocol trapping down in here. And at this point, we can't really find evidence of Mojave ground squirrels in this area around Mojave, in the western part of Edwards Air Force Base, down here in LA County, and much of this area around Victorville. Can't seem to find evidence that they're there. So, you know, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove they're really not there? Well, we're trying to fill in some of the gaps with more surveys, but right now it looks as though they may be missing from a lot of the southern part of the range. And I mentioned the green symbols, the round-tailed ground squirrels. At two sites west of Hinckley, both species were found together. So that Hinckley is west of Barstow, and then and there were a bunch of green dots west of Barstow over toward Hinckley. Hinckley, you may remember from the movie. So we're now finding a colleague, Marjorie Mattalk, who's a professor at University of Nevada, Reno, and her student, Casey Bell, are the experts on genetics of these two species. And we're now getting some evidence that hybridization may be occurring where the two species meet, particularly west of Barstow and the Hinckley area. And it looks like the hybrids may be fertile. So this is another thing to worry about. Just to show you some of the evidence that round-tailed ground squirrels occur with Mojave ground squirrels. So there's the Mojave ground squirrel with its hands on the stick that had the peanut butter on it early in the morning. So this is 10:36 in the morning on April 25th. And look who's sneaking in from the left over there. See the cinnamon-colored pelage, pale, and you can see it's the same site. And this was less than an hour later on the same day. So this is something, you know, this is like many miles further west than we thought round-tailed ground squirrels were occurring. So, okay. Doesn't look too bad up there. Okay. So I've tried to put together some of the occurrence data and figure out what areas within the range are important for Mojave ground squirrels. So this is from a publication in 2008. And so I've kind of delineated several areas. Like this is coastal range, Alantia. I've regarded this as a key population because we have evidence that they've been present there for many decades. There's good numbers. A similar area down here, Little Dixie Wash, that's where Harry lived. There's another area over here on Fort Irwin, north of Barstow, where there's records going back to the 70s. Then the only really good population that we know of in the southern part of the range is on Edwards Air Force Base. And then I've sort of indicated several other populations that we've documented. This is at the Desert Tortoise Natural Area. There's another population around Ridgecrest and so on. But again, this area here from Mojave down toward Lancaster, Palmdale, and over here, not much evidence that they're still doing well in that area. And since this map was done, we've picked up evidence throughout a lot of this area here that there are good populations there. So we kind of have a feeling for where the important areas are, although there's still some question marks. So getting into the area of threats, loss of habitat, habitat degradation. What about other things like natural drought, long series of dry years? What about climate change? So there's definitely been habitat loss over the years from development of desert cities like Lancaster, Palmdale, Ridgecrest. Agriculture, it's been tried in a lot of places, a lot of desert valleys where they drilled wells and pumped the water up and grew alfalfa. And then, after a couple of decades, the water level is so low in the wells that you can't afford the electricity anymore. So the farmers have kind of walked away. There's a little bit of new ag coming in around Ridgecrest. People are putting in pistachio orchards. But basically, urbanization since 2008 has not been moving so fast in the desert, and agriculture is kind of past its prime. Energy facilities, obviously we've got to somehow figure out how to deal with the big boom in renewable energy in the desert. So there's large facilities being planned and constructed for solar and for wind. Habitat degradation. Livestock grazing is often, pointed to as a problem. There is definitely dietary overlap between cattle, sheep, and squirrels. Everybody seems to like winter fat, especially if there isn't much else around. But there are some pretty good Mojave grass squirrel populations in areas that have been grazed for long periods of time. And particularly on BLM land, where they actually regulate the grazing and they don't allow grazing in dry years. Seems like the squirrels are able to put up with that. Other areas, like around California City, I showed a picture of creosote bush and versage, and not much in the way of other plants. That's the result, I think, of sheep grazing, unregulated sheep grazing for decades. So that's not a good thing. OHV recreation, you would think that even in open areas where people can ride their dirt bikes all over the place, you don't have to stay on trails. You would think that would be really bad for Mojave ground squirrels, and maybe it is, but we've found them living in places that get a lot of traffic from OHVs. The only way you could tell for sure would be long-term study, and maybe to remove the impact from certain areas and see if populations bounce back, but nobody's going to support long-term studies of that sort. Military training and testing, Edwards Air Force Base and the Navy at China Lake, most of their testing and training goes on in the air. It doesn't have a lot of impact on the ground. On Fort Irwin, where large-scale armored maneuvers have been carried out since the 80s, there's definitely been some impact to vegetation, and it may have adversely affected Mojave ground squirrels. But there are other areas on Fort Irwin where they seem to be doing okay. Natural drought, if you got 3 or 4 dry years in a row with no reproduction, that would probably wipe out a lot of MGS populations. So, so far, 3, actually if you go east of Barstow, where there are round-tailed ground squirrels, you find a number of sequences in the past where there were 3 or 4 years in a row where there was less than 3 inches of rain. And that's where round-tailed ground squirrels occur, and that's probably why Mojave ground squirrels don't occur there. Climate change. There was a recent study funded by the Energy Commission, was carried out by folks at U.S. Geological Survey in Henderson, Nevada, and also by folks at University of Nevada, Reno. And they looked at habitat suitability modeling under present conditions. And so they have a nice map that shows areas that are currently suitable for Mojave ground squirrels. And in spite of the fact that it was all done mysteriously in a computer, it turned out to be pretty reasonable, matched my prejudices. So then they said, well, let's do some projections of habitat suitability taking account of climate change scenarios. And when they did that, it turns out that there are significant areas west of Barstow where it's supposed to be completely unsuitable for Mojave ground squirrels in 2030. And this is also the area where we seem to be getting round-tailed ground squirrels moving in. Who knows? I'd really like to find out more about what's going on there, but maybe there is something to this climate change stuff, despite what you may hear. Okay, so conservation. I mentioned the West Mojave Plan, which went into effect in 2006, so less than 10 years ago. And in the green here is the Mojave ground squirrel conservation area under the West Mojave Plan. West Mojave Plan applies only to BLM land, and so private land down further south here or around California City is not involved. The habitat conservation area comprises something like 1.7 million acres, so it's substantial. The only limitation on the protection is that development of up to 1% could be allowed within that area over the 30 years of the plan. So that amounts to 17,000 acres, which quite a bit. But the thing that's interesting if you look at this is, you learn about reserve design in school, and you're supposed to keep it all compact, and this looks kind of crazy. You've got pieces out, you've got big gaps here. The military cannot commit to long-term conservation, so the conservation area is kind of broken up, and that's just because there's private land or military land that could not be involved. So where did this come from? When the West Mojave Plan was being developed, of course, there were many meetings. Meetings just went on and on. And there was a meeting in Ventura, I think in 1999, and the question of, well, what should we conserve? And so there was long discussion, and there's a big map up on the wall, and they turned to me and said, here's a marker, outline the Mojave ground squirrel conservation area. And I said, of course, well, I have no idea how to do that. They said, well, if you don't, nobody will. So I did it. And that's that's what you're looking at there. Okay, so renewable energy development in the desert. As you know, both state and federal governments are pushing, for good reason, development of these renewable energy resources in the desert. And there's lots of wind and sun out there. And the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan is being developed now. The draft is out. We have until January 9th to make comments on it. It's 6 volumes, and I haven't quite finished reading it yet. The idea is to facilitate siting of solar, wind, geothermal in areas that are appropriate in the California deserts, but at the same time conserving biological resources and cultural resources as well. So as you are used to with these big plans, there are 5 or 6 alternatives showing, and the DFA stands for Development Focus Area. So those are areas that are considered to be appropriate for renewable energy development, and development there would not be a death knell for important biological resources. So there are reserve designs as well, and each of those alternatives has to be looked at carefully. I haven't done it yet, but here is the interagency approved alternative. And I don't understand all of the symbols, although I've tried, but the thing that I've looked at are these red areas down around here and here and so on. Those are development focus areas. And it's interesting that for the most part, say this is the western boundary of the Mojave ground squirrel range. So there's a lot of proposed development areas that are outside the range. There are, keep losing this, down here in LA County, east of Lancaster and Palmdale, a lot of this area is abandoned ag, and similarly near Victorville here as well. So, I'm sure others may disagree, but to me, this preferred alternative doesn't look too bad. The only areas up here near Coso, Rose Valley, maybe questionable, might be a good area for Mojave ground squirrel, and there's an area near Inyo County here which has been proposed as a connection between the central part of the range and northern part, but it's already pretty thoroughly developed in that area. So that's preferred alternative, and here's just an example of one other. And I should say that in all of these alternatives, there's a big emphasis on private land, and particularly trying to locate private lands that are already degraded in some way and don't have a lot of value for biodiversity. So here's another alternative, and this one, you'll notice there's a possible development area over here, and that's an area that I think forms a good connection between the population at Edwards and the populations further north around Ridgecrest. So I would have questions about that. And then this proposed development focus area here is in the middle of this Little Dixie Wash population, which is probably one of the best pieces of habitat, but it gets a lot of wind and sun. So, you know, I would, you know, the first one I showed you looks pretty reasonable. This one I would have some questions about, speaking for the squirrel. So, let's see. So just in general, people have discussed, you know, how do you conserve Mojave ground squirrels? What's the best approach? And, you know, as you would expect, my opinion is that managing, acquiring conservation land in important areas is the most effective way to go. People talk, and I think there is some talk in the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, of restoration, and to try to restore a degraded site in the desert. Either you're going to spend an awful lot of money on irrigation and planting, or you're going to have to wait 500 years. So I'm not that enthusiastic about that approach. People have proposed, oh, well, let's translocate Mojave ground squirrels to areas where they've been wiped out. And this has been done once, but nobody ever followed up on it to find out if the squirrels survived or not. So I'm not really enthusiastic about that. And of course, you know, captive breeding. The Mojave ground squirrels, the males and females seem to get along fine for part of a day, but they're pretty asocial the rest of the time. I think it might be hard. I know people have done captive breeding on other ground squirrel species, but I'd prefer to just let them do their thing in nature. They can have lots of kids if conditions are right for them. Okay, so I don't know if people can look this, you know, save this, look it up later. I'm just, you know, throwing out a few recent references that might be of interest. There's, as I said, Marjorie Matoke here, and her student Casey Bell, published on phylogeography and based on the genetics. This is the work that was done under Energy Commission funding by USGS and University of Nevada, Reno. There's a colleague of mine, John Harris, and I did telemetry at COSO and published a couple of papers, and then I've got this current status, and I'm trying to get an update published currently. So anyway, those are just some references if people want to follow up, and I'd like to give my thanks to all the different organizations and folks who have supported Mojave ground squirrel work over the years, and you can see them all there. At the bottom, probably hundreds of students and professional biologists have contributed to this work over the years, and if you're out there listening, you know who you are. Too many names to even mention. So with that, here's Mojave mixed woody scrub, excellent Mojave ground squirrel habitat. That alternative, the second alternative of the DRECP that I showed you, envisions this being covered with solar panels, but prefer to think of it this way with the rainbow. So that's it, and I'd be happy to try to answer questions.
WebEx can hear your question as well. And if you're listening on WebEx, you can type in a question and I will read it. Oh, any questions? I have a question.
I was just wondering what the breeding season was for the round-tailed ground squirrel in comparison to the Mojave.
That's a really good question. Because the round-tailed ground squirrel is so widely distributed and so common in California, it's not listed, nobody has ever studied its ecology in California. There's some folks in Arizona, but whether their work applies here, I assume that it must be in the spring, more or less the same time as Mojave ground squirrels, but it's amazing. We really don't know anything about this common species. It's just, that's just a round-tailed ground squirrel. Who cares?
Well, thank you. That's interesting.
Okay.
I actually have a question as well. Apologize if I missed it, but what is the average lifespan of NGS?
The average lifespan, so these questions are being recorded, right? Okay. The average lifespan would be difficult to calculate, the average, but you think about all the young that are produced and how naive they are and how many predators are around. I suspect the average, we don't really know, but I suspect the average lifespan is probably less than a year. However, we do have a couple of records of females that were tagged as juveniles that were recaptured 6 years later. So 6 is probably the maximum, if they're very lucky.
Hi Phil, thanks for your talk and thanks for all your work. So I had a question about the range sizes for the males and females. So if the males and females are only meeting on, one day of the year.
Special day, yeah.
Yeah. Why do the males have such a large home range? Are they getting together with multiple females?
Yes, that would be my guess. When I've occasionally had a chance to follow a radio-collared male around, it was pretty obvious that it was going to check up on several females and see how they were feeling that day. We also have, from that Freeman Gulch site, we apparently picked up data on a female who was receptive, because I remember we were communicating by walkie-talkie, and the person who said, okay, so I've got a fix on this animal, she's by her burrow, and then it checked other frequencies, and oh, that's male so-and-so about 100 meters away, and then there's a second male and then a third male. And so there's, if Marjorie Matoke and I get the time to go over some of the data, we should be able to show that there's multiple paternity in a litter. And but that's pretty typical behavior for ground squirrels. It's not just Mojave ground squirrels, but that the males will move around looking for females, and they will try to mate with as many as they can find. And there's competition, as you saw with the chart, the map showing the overlapping males. So there may be several males trying to get the attention of a female at a time. But that's pretty typical mating behavior for ground squirrels.
We have a question on WebEx
Okay.
that I'll read for you. If MGS is not bothered by military exercises in the air, which I assume are allowed, would you suppose that MGS is not significantly impacted by noise?
So Okay, I'll repeat the question. Give me some time to think. The question was whether Mojave ground squirrels were impacted or affected by noise in the environment. I believe that, again, this is just based on a number of random observations, but I believe that, that like many animals, Mojave ground squirrels become accustomed to noise. And around Edwards Air Force Base, for example, almost every day, biologists out there are shocked by sonic booms. And I have never watched a squirrel react to a sonic boom, but I would guess that they get used to it. The other observations that I've had are in areas with OHV activity. And near Ridgecrest in the Spangler Hills open area, we had some camera stations, and I was out on a Friday afternoon picking up cameras at the end of the week, and we knew that we had pictures of a squirrel in that area, and there was a dirt bike trail running through, and as I came up toward the dirt bike trail, the folks were practicing. So there would be, 4 or 5 dirt bikes roaring past. And between me and the trail, there was a Mojave ground squirrel sitting there watching the dirt bikes. So that's my sample size. So, yeah, it's not the best I can do. Anecdotes.
Do you have another question?
Okay.
And the question is, for project avoidance, is it better to do ground disturbing work in fall and winter when they're below ground, or in spring and summer when they're active?
Oh boy. Yeah, I've had that question before, and I'm not sure that I can answer it adequately. My guess is it's probably better to do ground disturbing work in the fall and winter when they're inactive underground. In that, they'd have to, a squirrel would have to be really unlucky to have a trencher come along right through its hibernation burrow and wake it up, whereas if they're out running around during the active season, they're more likely to be hit by vehicles, that sort of thing. But I wish I've told a lot of stories, and I wish we had more data. But also in a lot of projects, ground disturbing projects, they have the biologists out there ahead of the equipment, or doing what they call rat holing, which means if you see a burrow, dig it up and see what's in there. And I've never heard of a Mojave ground squirrel being unearthed in that way.
Talk about the dormancy. What are we talking about? Are we talking about a full hibernation or just a partial hibernation?
So there are actual records of Mojave ground squirrels being seen or trapped above ground every month of the year. So like a lot of hibernating, I mean, it's there back in the 60s when this fellow Jack Hudson was studying the physiology of ground squirrels. There was great debate. Now, is this estivation because they're dormant during the hot time of year, the summer, or is it hibernation and because they're also dormant during the winter? And that's why I refer to it as dormancy. But it is a full physiological phenomenon. They, like most hibernating animals, they probably arouse every few weeks, maybe just to empty the bladder, and then go back in again within a few hours. Nobody's really studied them that much in the lab, but yeah, they're probably inactive almost all of the time between summer and early spring underground. They're also very clever when they dig their dormancy burrow. They seem to really do a lot of remodeling. So you see piles of dirt in June or July where they're digging their burrow. And then when they go underground, you can't see any sign of the burrow. And you can, if you have a radio-collared animal in dormancy, you can detect where it is within a few inches from the signal, but you can't find any sign of the burrow. They just completely plug it up and clean the whole area, which, if you think about it, over thousands of years with coyotes and badgers around, that the ones that did a good job at that probably were the ones that survived.
I have a quick question. Your last slide, you showed that beautiful habitat. So what would happen if they were to develop that with solar? How? I mean, would it just destroy the habitat, or?
What I've seen of what I've seen of solar installations, they remove all the vegetation, they clear and level the ground. And if they're smart, they may put down gravel to keep the dust down, so they don't have to wash the panels as often. Excuse me. I think it would be completely gone. I don't think there would. There have been cases. There is at least one project in the San Joaquin Valley on the west side of the San Joaquin, or in Carrizo Plain, and I haven't seen it, but where they've put the panels on stanchions, and they have not cleared the ground underneath. And apparently, kangaroo rats and kit foxes have established themselves. So it might be possible to work something out. I don't know, but the projects I've seen are ones in which the habitat is completely gone. And a large project might cover 2,000 acres. So it's significant.
So I remember looking at a depiction on a map based on a genetic study where the relative heterozygosity of individuals were depicted. That is, with I think the implication that areas of high heterozygosity were probably areas where during periods of drought, those are the areas that represent the refugia during extended drought periods. And areas of low heterozygosity are areas where the populations expanded into within the range of the species. Could you comment on that? Have you seen that work?
That work would have to have been done by Marjorie Matoch, and I don't remember seeing that presentation exactly, but the way you describe it, it makes sense that an area that where local extirpation has occurred, that some animals move in, and they may represent only a small sample of the population that they come from, and so there would be less heterozygosity. So it's logical. That yeah.
If you relate to this, have you? Well, perhaps related to this. Have you looked at considered the areas that you tentatively identified as, I think maybe we call them core areas and corridors,
Yeah.
Relative to anticipated effects of climate change on habitat suitability? With the question of whether or not the species can disperse over time to areas that remain suitable or become suitable.
Yeah, there have been some studies attempting to model what might happen going beyond 2030 to 2080, and at that point, virtually all of the existing range of the ground squirrel is supposed to be unsuitable. The only area that might still be okay would be in Owens Valley, north of Owens Lake. So there have been studies trying to figure out, what pathways should be conserved in order to let them move that way. It's kind of a depressing thing to think about. Did that help?
Yes, it did. I hate to end on a depressing note.
Well, yeah.
Otherwise, positive presentation. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I would like to not believe in that model, but I
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's about what we have time for today. So thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful, and thanks for taking the time to come and talk with us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Took me about 2 years. Thank you so much for coming over. Absolutely. I really, really appreciate it. Well,